Hi, this is Jeff Kober, and we welcome you to Disney Insights. Thanks for joining us. We are kind of behind in celebrating Disney California Adventure through its 25th year, and yet one cannot really talk about this park without considering what was to have been created originally in its place. Westcot may be the most popular park concept that Disney never built. A West Coast version of Epcot, this park was in many ways more ambitious than its neighbor across the promenade, Disneyland itself. We will look at this amazing design as well as the entire proposal for what was originally intended to become the Disneyland Resort. We'll look at the whole of it, what it included, how it would impact Anaheim, and then consider what led ultimately to its fall. Join me on this fascinating look into a park led by Imagineer Tony Baxter and what could have created an entire Disneyland resort different than the one we know now. This podcast is produced by myself and Performance Journeys, which offers training, development, and consultant support to organizations big and small, entrepreneurs, new and established. With a wide variety of resources and long-time in-the-trench experience, we offer workshops, online learning, coaching, and more to organizations that want to build their teams, raise organizational excellence, improve leadership, and create customer loyalty. So, hey, check us out over at performancejourneys.com. As with our podcast, be sure to check out this website, disneyinsights.com, where we offer key points, photos, videos, links, and more. In today's discussion, we'll refer to several maps found on this site of disneyinsights.com. They will be able to kind of shape what your understanding of Westcot was actually intended to be. Note that also our YouTube channel carries our podcast, so please subscribe to our Disney Insights YouTube page, as it will be more a part of our social media strategy moving forward. We appreciate any positive ratings, reviews, and referrals. Just taking the time to share with others to join our podcast is so gratefully appreciated. Well, the success of the entire Walt Disney World resort experience led management, particularly under the Michael Eisner, Frank Wells era, to give consideration to the possibility of creating something similar at Disneyland out in California. A key driver of this was the runaway success of the Disney MGM Studios in 1989, a far smaller park than Epcot or Magic Kingdom, but it clearly paved the way for longer stays at the resort and thus bigger revenues. The blessing of size at Walt Disney World was not in Disney's favor when it came to Anaheim, but there had been additional property acquisition made when possible. Moreover, there was a hunger to be ambitious about what Disneyland could be, much more than a one-day stay kind of park. To make this happen, the most important acquisition was actually the Disneyland Hotel, which was owned by Jack Rather, a friend of Walt Disney, who had been encouraged to build a hotel next to the happiest place on earth. Walt not only encouraged Jack to finance the project, but gave him the rights to use the Disneyland name on not only this hotel, but any other hotel Jack might build. He didn't build any other hotels, but he could have, using that name. And then Walt added a monorail line right to the front door of that hotel. That Disneyland hotel operation grew into a complete resort experience of its own, with 3 hotel towers. Eisner was blown away when he joined the company that Disney actually didn't own this and went after all efforts to purchase it. Jack Rather died only 2 months after Eisner came in, but his wife, Bonita Granville, held onto it steady until about 1988. Then Disney sought investment and ultimately completed acquisition of not only the resort, but other surrounding parcels of the property it held, and also other properties and um, companies that Rather had owned. In particular, a substantial tourist attraction in Long Beach, California. This was the start of making something much bigger of Disneyland itself, and the company sought to not only design a concept for a new theme park, but an entire master plan for what would be known as the Disneyland Resort. The hope was that Disney would not only get the city of Anaheim and the community behind it, but would also provide key financial investment and support for the infrastructure needed to make it happen. And oh, by the way, to clean up and revitalize a sprawling mess that had been created all around and up and down Harbor and Katella boulevards surrounding Disneyland. To understand the Disneyland Resort overview, you need to understand there are several key aspects to this proposed Disneyland Resort. It included a resort hotel district, a specialty dining, retail, and entertainment district, an entirely new traffic and parking management plan, the revitalization of the larger Anaheim commercial district, and finally, a new park to be named Westcot. Let's look briefly at each. Let's start with the hotel resort district. To truly make the Disneyland Resort a resort, it would need hotels. And the Disneyland Hotel itself was not enough. The plan was to build 3 new themed hotels that would celebrate California's most famous architectural landmarks. These hotels included, first, the new Disneyland Hotel, an 800-room resort that would be based on the famed Hotel del Coronado in San Diego. It would actually sit affront the original Disneyland Hotel. The second would be the Mission Inn in Santa Barbara, which would serve, the Mission in Santa Barbara would serve as the architectural inspiration in offering a low-rise 960-room hotel that would sit across from where Disneyland was. It would be called the Magic Kingdom Hotel. And then the largest of these 3 hotels was the 1,800 Westcot Lake Resort that would take on the look and feel of the Beverly Hills Hotel. Altogether, the hotels, to include the original Disneyland Hotel, would add up to more than 5,100 rooms. What was West Street would then become known, or proposed to become known, as Disneyland Drive. The monorail would weave around not just the Disneyland Hotel, but all of this district. What was not included at this time is what is now known as the Pixar Place Hotel. That property was separate and was built in 1984 at the time the Olympics was being held in Los Angeles. Known as the Emerald, it was owned by the Tokyo Corporation, a very different corporation that owned Tokyo Disneyland. It was later named as the Pan Pacific Hotel in alignment with the brand of hotels known as the Pan Pacific Hotels before being purchased by the Walt Disney Company later on in 1995. When they did that, it would eventually receive the title Paradise Pier Hotel in connection with the development of Disney's California Adventure, which opened in 2001. And then when Paradise Pier became Pixar Pier, the hotel would again finally change its name and theme to what it is known as of today. But back then, at the time this was all being proposed around that hotel. The hotel was not part of the actual Disneyland Resort Hotel District. And then you have the Disneyland Center Plaza and Amphitheater. A key aspect of this build-out would be to create a shopping, dining, and entertainment district that would glue together the two parks, and all three of the hotels in the hotel district. This was known as the Disneyland Center and was largely located where downtown Disney is known or is found today. But the focus here was thematically different. It was a 6-acre lake that would give influence to beach themes of the Venice Boardwalk, the Palisades, and the Catalina Island Casino. All of this would offer a variety of retail, dining, and entertainment facilities for both guests and area residents alike. As you stepped away from this, you would enter a promenade not too unlike what you find today between Disneyland and Disney California Adventure. But if you kept walking, you would find nestled in the corner, kind of where Toy Story parking drop off is and Harbor Boulevard. There they gave space and design to a 5,000-seat amphitheater. Now note, the Universal Hollywood Park had since the early 1970s had an amphitheater of its own with over 6,000 seats. That would later be, by the way, demolished to add Harry Potter out there in Hollywood. And then, of course, there was always the legendary Hollywood Bowl with 17,500 seats. Disney apparently thought to complete this whole resort experience, they would need an equivalent down in Orange County. By the way, it should be noted, the Universal Hollywood would open a similar dining, shopping, entertainment concept later in 1993 that would be known as Universal City Walk. That probably influenced Disney to change the name of the Disneyland Center to a more urban name, such as Downtown Disney, as we know it today. Disney's Grand Californian Resort, with its American craftsman style, also influenced the architectural look of much of what became that shopping, dining, and entertainment district. But the Grand Californian was not part of the original Disneyland Resort concept, nor was its architectural look, nor was there even the idea of putting a hotel there. That space where the Grand Californian was actually going to be part of Westcot Center. Now, in addition to this whole Disneyland Center and the hotel district, there would be a whole new traffic and parking management plan. Dial back, and Disneyland at certain times of the day was painful to navigate. Well, actually, it's still painful to navigate, but it was particularly painful back then. Roads were not wide enough to bring in and out of the parking lot the number of guests coming to visit Disneyland. Back in that day, the Disneyland parking was where Disney California Adventure is now and where Westcot was being proposed. You would come in largely on Harbor Boulevard, although you could also kind of come in on Catella during peak seasons. And then you would exit off of West Street, kind of moving everything away. But notwithstanding, the whole thing was a mess. Add your motel and your area traffic, the whole thing was just chaos. Then you add the legendary LA freeway system. So all of this brought onto the freeway, the whole thing was just crazy. There was legislation called Measure M, which at that time had recently been approved by Orange County voters to provide funds to widen the I-5 freeway and to improve the off and on ramps. Disney wanted to ride that wave and work to get motorists to exit the freeway into not one, but two new sets of public parking structures serving the resort area, all of which would keep that traffic from local roads, thus reducing the congestion. North of Disneyland Hotel at that time was something Rather had built called Vacationland, which, by the way, was also the name of a magazine that Disney circulated among hotels throughout Anaheim. It was called Vacationland Magazine. At any rate, that space there, that acreage, was essentially an RV camping location done Rather style. It was in many ways a precursor to Fort Wilderness Campground, but without all the frontier theming. It would be utilized as a major parking lot structure under this plan that many would ultimately know today as Mickey and Friends and Pixar Pals parking structure. But Disney's plan was to build a major parking set of structures on the east side of Disneyland as well, one of which would be where Anaheim Garden Walk is today, and the other essentially across the way where Disney is actually now getting ready to build a new parking lot structure. The coolest aspect of all this is that to circulate guests from these parking lot structures would not be trams, but would be a sophisticated system of moving sidewalks and elevated people movers, as well as an expanded monorail system. Indeed, the removal of the older people mover system in Tomorrowland to build out a newer rocket ride system that ultimately failed may have made some sense at that time, given that the intention was to allow a newer people mover system to benefit traffic moving across the Disneyland Resort. Of course, that didn't happen, although it's not to say it might not happen in the future, especially with the newer parking lot structure, but that's just me guessing. You have to put money to these things, but who knows what might happen. At any rate, all of this structure would help get guests in and out of the Disneyland area. But all of this could be had only if the city of Anaheim would make serious investments in revitalizing what had become an endless slosh of motels, gas stations, coffee shops, and tourist stands. Disney wanted all of this ugliness to be fixed. They knew it couldn't look like Walt Disney World, but it sure could be something better than what it was. To that end, they proposed that all the space up and down Harbor and Katella Boulevards be brought into a sort of garden district that would be an extensively landscaped system of walkways, thoroughfares, streetscapes, and promenades designed to create a more combined park-like look and feel. Signage would be modified so that no one entity would be in competition to outdoing the other and attracting attention. It would truly become a safer, friendlier place to visit and would make the entire resort experience come together. Now, we'll talk about some of the effects of this later on, but before doing so, we have to get to the crown jewel of all of this, which was Westcot Center. This was the proposed second gate to the Disneyland Resort. Now, the spelling of Westcot or Westcot Center and the use of the word center would vary much like it would over time for Epcot itself. But clearly, this was the Western version of its sister in Orlando. Epcot was the first time Disney had built a park that was not a castle Magic Kingdom style park as they had done, of course, originally in Anaheim, followed by Orlando, and even in Tokyo. This new design was ambitious and expensive, but with time, Epcot had proven itself and is even today the most successful park after Disneyland and Magic Kingdom. Disney had also had big success in building Disney MGM Studios, but the idea of building a studio park didn't seem to make sense to Disney since Los Angeles was home to motion picture studios of all kinds, to include Universal, which even was a studio theme park. This is all, of course, ironic. So much of this plan of what would eventually become would be based on California. But notwithstanding all this, at the time, the thought was to create a new version of Epcot. Call it Westcot and put it across from Disneyland. The layout would vary during the initial phases of design, But I've included a map. In fact, I've included a couple of maps in DisneyInsights.com. You can follow along to kind of get a sense of how this park would be laid out and what it would look like. The park would be designed as a series of, well, back up. Epcot is done in a figure eight design, where the top of the figure eight is Future World, and then you go to the bottom of the figure eight, which is World Showcase. This design would be different. It would be essentially a series of three concentric circles, or three or four, considering how you define a circle, define what's in it. The first would be a small island where the centerpiece of the park would be located. Then there would be a lake, followed by a ring of World Showcase-like attractions, followed by an outer ring of Future Worlds style attractions. So it would be a series of kind of rings moving outwards. It was a very ingenious design if you could figure out the movement of traffic, particularly to the outer rings. We'll cover that a little later. But to begin with, you would enter again from the promenade, which faced Disneyland. You would go through kind of your ticketing area, and then you would immediately come over a bridge into what was known as Space Station Earth. The centerpiece of this park is Space Station Earth. But in this case, it's on steroids. The original Spaceship Earth at Epcot is 180 feet, and of course, is a silver and geodesic style building in shape. Here we have not one, but two spheres all together. This outside was a lattice of metal and apparently glass or some kind of plastic that would then cover a larger golden sphere underneath. But what really made this stand out in a big way was that this would essentially be 300 feet in size. Remember, I just said Spaceship Earth was 180. This would be 300 feet in size. That's essentially two Matterhorn mountains stacked up on top of each other. Or, if you want to take a more contemporary approach, consider the Sphere in Las Vegas, which I believe is about at 360 feet. Larger than this design, but notwithstanding, the whole concept, I would talk about how as a child, I'd be looking for the Matterhorn from way back in Palm Springs. Of course, you couldn't see it until you nearly got off of the I-5 freeway. But this thing you could see from a distance because essentially a 300-foot size sphere is essentially a 30-story building. So it's a pretty massive size thing. Now, the attraction in here would be something known as cosmic journeys. This is different than what you see the journey of communication that you see in Spaceship Earth. We'll talk about elements of that later. But this attraction would take you in an attraction similar to Adventure Through Inner Space. Now, this is important. This whole proposal was led by Tony Baxter. And Tony Baxter began his career, serving ice cream at Carnation Plaza Gardens, but got connected into Imagineering via Claude Coates. And Claude Coates was one of the key original Imagineers. And one of his original attractions that he led on was the Adventure Through Inner Space that was introduced at Disneyland in the Tomorrowland of 1967. There you would go be shrunk down as a water molecule into the size of atoms and even smaller than that. And this led you in an Omnimover vehicle to do that. That was the intent of that ride, which, by the way, is now Star Tours at Disneyland. Well, this experience of cosmic journeys would take you, rather than from big to small, likely it was going to take you from small to big. It was based on a film called The Powers of 10, which was a film made in 1977 for IBM, and it dealt with the idea of the relative size of things in the universe. and that just by adding another 0 to 10 to the size of something makes it phenomenally bigger or smaller depending on which way it goes. So the pavilion would showcase this. It would take you from the smallest tiny atom all the way up to an enormous universe that would be expanded at the top, I assume, of the sphere of this attraction. This was pretty amazing in size, but this large edifice also became a lightning rod for what ultimately would become the fall for this resort attraction. The community complained that a 300-foot size ball of light was just too much. And they argued that this was way inappropriate for, and mind you have to understand that the residents of Anaheim were only a couple of blocks away. They still are only a couple of blocks away. You could literally look on the back of Disneyland and see residents down below of the new DVC tower that is on the back of the Disneyland Hotel. It's that proximate, that close. So this became a challenge. And what happened is in subsequent versions of this design, they took out the ball and they kind of created a sort of sphere that would shoot out. And so it was replaced by a sort of different kind of look and feel in later designs that you will see. But notwithstanding, it was always the centerpiece of this. Also, from this center island, which is in the middle of this park, you would then move to the 7 wonders, 3 of which would make up a sort of future world, and the other 3 providing a world showcase, or the other 4, I should say, the other 4 providing a world showcase by moving you throughout the 4 corners of the world. World Showcase was not a number of different countries, but rather the bundling of different world regions. Note that also the monorail also extends around the centerpiece island. Technically, an entire system of pedestrian walkways, moving sidewalks, and something of a people mover, some system that would particularly take you out to the outer regions where the future world was on the outer circle of this. Again, you have to look at the map, but when you look at the map, you'll see that you cannot reach the 3 different future world pavilions by walking to them. You had to, an underground access was created to provide for this. It also allowed the future world attractions were largely indoor attractions, creating kind of a sound barrier between the park and whatever noise congestion was created here in that, and from, again, pedestrian suburban communities throughout. So you had this venture port. Then you could also board the World Cruise, or what was also known at one point as the Rivers of Time. Now, this is not to be confused with Rios del Tiempo, which was the original name of the boat ride in Mexico at Epcot. But Tony Baxter imagined a boat attraction so extensive, so long, that would take some 45 minutes to go around the lake on. It would circle around these 4 corners of the world, or World Showcase, with 5 different stops. And throughout the journey, you would be given these beautiful indoor panoramas, giving you a taste of each geographical region. Think about like the Sistine Chapel, or Leonardo da Vinci working on his works of art. Think of those kinds of scenarios that you see in Spaceship Earth at Epcot, but played out as your boat sailed through each of these different geographical regions. I think of it somewhat similar to the lines of how the Crystal Grotto boats at Shanghai Disney actually take you underneath the castle there at Shanghai. Only in this case, you would be experiencing not fantasy, but the culture and history of each of these different countries. So this lake was actually an attraction that not only provided beautiful views, but took guests by boat. And I assume it would allow you to also drop people off at different locations, but you could always pick it up and then see and visit these other different areas. And as you look at the map, you can see that these waterways really fed into the overall design of this Rivers of Time cruise, which, along with Space Station Earth and the Cosmic Journeys attraction within itself, really were two prime and key attractions in this entire Westcot proposal. Now we're going to move from this island inner ring and the waters around it to the next major ring, which is the four corners of the world. And we're going to work our way. Again, you might want to look at the map on DisneyInsights.com, but we're going to work around work around counterclockwise, starting with kind of from the 9 to 12 o'clock position on the clock. We're going to enter the world of Africa. So imagine rafting expedition down the rivers of Africa. This is at the highlight of this. It would include a giant tree where the stories of this continent would be shared. It would house here the Tishman African Art Museum. You may recall that Tishman, after building the World Trade Center, went on to build Epcot Center and the Swan and Dolphin Resort. Tishman had his own African art collection, which is now part of the Smithsonian, but at that time was being considered as an addition to Westcot. By the way, note that Eisner was all about attractions, but also about the culture. And in fact, at one time, Eisner wanted a tribute to the three major religions to be played out in this corner of the world. And it would be a kind of a combined presentation which would showcase the 7 days of creation. Included would be a peace garden, which would kind of serve as an accompaniment to this setting. Later on, a secondary expansion would include an Egyptian palace. And you see images in the graphics of actual pyramids that would dot the landscape and would be kind of a part of that whole look and feel of the world of Africa. From there, we move from the 9 to the 6 o'clock space, more or less, 5:30 space, into Asia. The world of Asia was really essentially Japan and China and even India, all clustered together to create this corner of the park. Included was a thrill ride where inside a car, designed kind of to look like a Chinese lion, the kind you might see in a Chinatown parade, you would be rushed along the Great Wall of China, along this dragon and its tail, through the mountains. A carousel in another place would highlight mythical Asian animals that you could ride on. And then there would be a white marble Indian palace which would highlight that dining and cuisine in this section of the four corners of the world. Perhaps the largest of the four corners of the world might be the Old World, which was one of the larger World Showcase regions because it would cover all of Europe. France, Germany, Italy, and the United Kingdom would all be represented, but so would Russia and Greece, which was not represented at Epcot back in Florida. In one corner, you would see the Eiffel Tower like you would at Epcot, but in another, you'd see Big Ben, and in another, you would see St. Basil's Cathedral. A Tivoli Gardens section would be part of this and would add children's attractions. If you'll recall, Tivoli Gardens was one of several primary sources of inspiration for Walt Disney when he created Disneyland, especially the concept of Main Street USA with its lights on at night. A particular attraction focusing on Europe's culture and history was to feature Visionarium, or the Visionarium at Disneyland Paris, or the Timekeeper as it was introduced at Magic Kingdom in Walt Disney World. This show, which we talked about last week in our Buzz Lightyear discussion, featured Robin Williams and Rhea Perlman as droids, which would take us through a Circle Vision tour to see Leonardo da Vinci, Jules Verne, and H.G. Wells. It was a perfect way to give us a sense of the breadth of the past, present, and future of Europe. An additional big attraction was also the Trans-European Express, where you would be in a simulation or simulator of a speeding train that would cover the continent while being in a James Bond style chase. This is similar to an earlier concept that was actually was the original concept for an attraction at Japan at Epcot, but it was never built ultimately. Now, from there we go to move to kind of the 12 o'clock to 3 o'clock section of the park where we enter into the world of Americas. This area would encompass both North and South America. North America would look something like New York or Philadelphia waterfront district set in the 1870s, particularly at the time of the 1876 Centennial Exposition, which you see in the American Adventure at Epcot. By the way, Epcot's American Adventure would be also represented and cloned here. This setting provided opportunities for a sort of steampunk industrial aesthetic, one that Tony Baxter played out, and would feature very well that New York waterfront district of the late 1800s. Canada was also given its own show with a First Nation Spirit Lodge attraction. This was similar to what actually became Mystery Lodge at Knott's Berry Farm not too many years later. And South America would include stepping into a Mayan pyramid, not unlike the one you see when you visit Epcot, but where not only dining is available in the twilight of the pavilion, but so would children's attractions of the B and C ticket variety that younger children would enjoy. Another spirit show would feature Inca and Aztec cultures. You could see that Eisner really wanted to create a Westcot that featured not only a lot of culture, as you find in Epcot, but also still had a lot of attractions and something for youth to enjoy, small children. By the way, you'll notice that in the drawings, and all of this is really played out if you take a look at the drawing I have on DisneyInsights.com, there are gates here to actually lead you directly into the amphitheater, which is in the far upper right of the drawing here. And that made it simple to get in and out of the park to actually go to one of those shows. So you should note that being at this part of the park and being on the right side, you have space for what is always the most important thing when you exit a Disney theme park, and that is a gift shop. So all of this became the four corners of the world: Africa, Asia, Europe, and the Americas. That was the next ring. Then we move to the final ring, the outside ring. And the thing you'll see when you look at the map carefully, and you look at models also that I show on DisneyInsights.com, is that none of the Future World attractions are accessible by foot. What was happening is you had to get on some transportation at Ventureport that would take you, I suppose, under the water and the World Showcase portion, the four corners of the world, out to the three different pavilions that made up the Future World portion. Let's talk about those again in counterclockwise styles, beginning with Wonders of Life. This was kind of behind the African section, but again, not accessible by Africa unless the transportation, the people mover, whatever was underneath there would allow you to connect. This would take the best part of the Wonders of Life pavilion at Epcot. It would include Body Wars, Cranium Command, which I very much loved, and The Making of Me, and it would all be included. But also included would be Journey into Imagination, which of course was Tony Baxter's big contribution to the original Epcot Center. That would be involved there. In this corner, below it, which would have been behind Asia, and I assume I assume that this is where Wonders of Space or Science, and by the way, it shared both titles, Wonders of Space or Wonders of Science. I assume this is where this was because you see something of a Challenger shuttlecraft on the roof as kind of part of the design. But at any rate, one of the three future worlds of Westcott would allow you to experience the cosmos traveling through distant planets in space. Other versions of this pavilion showcase that is the Wonders of Science. Um, we don't have a lot of knowledge of what would be included here. There was a lot of discussion about creating some form of horizons, which was very popular at Epcot. I assume that maybe this is where horizons might have shown up. But at any rate, that that was one of the three future worlds. Now you go to the other side, kind of sandwiched behind Europe and the Americas, you get the Wonders of Earth. This is believed to be the Wonders of Earth Pavilion. And it's considered to be one of the larger open air spaces inside. Plus, you notice that there's kind of a greenhouse look in effect. But here you would move through different exotic environments like the Arctic or the desert. And it would include something similar to um, um, living with the land. All of these would be future world type facilities built, and having them on the outside in big indoor pavilions allowed it to become kind of a sound barrier. Now, there's a couple of things I should also note that I failed to highlight, particularly about the world, Four Corners of the World Showcase portion. The origins of the look and feel of this, and you really get this when you look at the map. You're not having individual countries show up, but you get this whole kind of all these different countries kind of all smudged together. The origins of this look and feel for the Four Corners of the World takes its earliest cue perhaps from Harper Goff. Harper Goff, if you remember, was the original designer of Disneyland's Jungle Cruise, and in the early designs of Epcot, the World Showcase pavilions were largely indoor buildings where guests entered each along a semicircular design, not too unlike the look and feel of the original Communicore or Innoventions space. Harper Goff imagined countries all clustered together, all coming toward the water's edge of the large lagoon. The design of the Four Corners of the World with its cluster of countries really follows that look and feel, that same kind of, what I want to call it, cluster design. The other thing to say about the Four Corners of the World is the proposed, even before, remember, this is 1990 being designed and 1991 being introduced. This is being proposed even before Disneyland Paris opens up with the hotel at its entrance. So, by the way, remember, Tony Baxter led the design of Disneyland Paris. This opportunity would afford you the unique chance to stay inside the park with 4 or 5 stories, creating the backdrop of all of these World Showcase Four Corners of the World. So you could stay inside Africa in an African style resort. You could stay inside of Asia in Asian themed rooms. You could stay inside rooms that mirrored France or England or Russia or Greece. And you could stay, all of these places allowed you a place to stay inside the park, not just at the entrance of the park, but inside the park. Tony Baxter talks about the idea, wouldn't it be great to get up at 2 o'clock in the morning and walk downstairs and grab a slice of pizza downstairs? There's operational concerns all over that, which we'll talk about a little later. But that was the whole kind of idea, was that you could literally stay inside Westcott. Well, there are some really great ideas about this. And in May of 1991, the Walt Disney Company announced all of these plans in what would be part of a let me just restate it, $3 billion expansion. Mind you, the biggest expansion they had done previous to this minus Tokyo was the 1 point something billion Epcot. So this is now a $3 billion expansion being announced basically a decade and a half later. Response was all over the board, with fans being in huge favor of what could be an amazing park to visit, and with the Anaheim citizens, not all enthused. What were some of the cool things about this park and the entire resort? First of all, it was a really beautiful design. The idea of these concentric circles rather than a figure eight, which you see at Epcot, that was a really clever design, and one you kind of see played out in a future resort that we'll talk about it a little later. It was really the best of Epcot. It was a tighter, intimate design. One of the challenges of Epcot, and remember, some people say that Epcot stands not for experimental community, prototype community of tomorrow, but every person comes out tired. That walking around World Showcase, this lagoon was going to be a much tighter lagoon, and it was going to be a much tighter, intimate space. And actually, the use of space ultimately was far better than what they ended up doing with Disney California Adventure, which one of the challenges of that park is it has a very poor design space in terms of how they eventually went about creating that park. This was something you really wanted to visit. This is something you'd really want to see. There was something for everybody, something for children, something for adults, a culture, attractions, thrill rides. It was really a complete package. And the whole idea of a Anaheim revitalization plan, that was a huge opportunity because Harbor and Katella, they were a mess. They were absolutely a mess to look at. They're still not perfect by any stretch, but back then it looked horrible. Wires hanging all over and signs of every imaginable size and type competing with each other. This offered something much more friendly, much more park-like, and the opportunity of doing a revitalization plan to the entirety of this tourist district was a terrific idea behind all of the Disneyland Resort. Now, with that, there were some challenges. At the center of this was a very big ball. They just did it too big. And the concept of having that big ball would have been seen everywhere, including Disneyland. You would stand in front of the castle and see this big ball. You would see it from every location anywhere. It was just too big. And that was really becoming the lightning rod for people's protest of the entire park and the entire plan. There were also some dead ends to this. If you recall, the original design of Disneyland, you didn't connect from Adventureland to Frontierland or Tomorrowland to Fantasyland. You went in and then you came out. And I also talk about Epic Universe having this problem also. This was a little bit of that problem. You could go all the way around the circle in the Four Corners of the World Showcase, but Future World were 3 separate pavilions. They were not connected, from all I could tell, and the access to them came from Futureport with maybe a stop along the Four Corners of the World to pick up or drop off people on the way to those endpoints. And they were indeed endpoints, and that, I think, was a big mess. Along with it came the far corner of it, which was an amphitheater. Now, I really question that Disney needed an amphitheater. Most amphitheaters really get their use on a Saturday night, a Friday night, maybe a Sunday night, maybe a weekend day, but seldom Monday through Thursday. And Disneyland was an attraction and operation going 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. To have had this thing sit empty, unless they were going to add entertainment shows, much in the same way that you might have shows during Food and Wine Festival. But even then, that would have been too big a venue for doing that. I don't know that the amphitheater made sense, and obviously it ultimately didn't make sense to Disney because they cut it out. And then there is the hotel concept of staying inside the hotels. Now, who wouldn't want to stay inside a Disney park hotel or Disney park? And everything from staying inside the Cinderella Castle to staying at the front of Disneyland Paris Park to now what are the hotels that line that the hotel that lines Tokyo Disney Sea. The problem with this is that if you look at the maps, you imagine yourself staying in one of these hotel rooms, say in Europe, and you're sitting in this French thing that overlooks, the beauty of this park and so forth. And then you remember, oh my gosh, I forgot to get the medications out of my car. I gotta go back to my car. Well, where the freak is the car? Because you basically have got to go exit the park, and then you've got to get on the people mover and take it out to the parking lot structure, because there was no parking adjacent to the actual hotel at this time. And so your ability to access your car, which is kind of a necessity, yeah, there's some problems with the hotel access. And then the final thing for this is just the cost of this. $3 billion. Well, honestly, $3 billion was worth it. And when you think about the fact that they spent well over $1 billion to fix what became well over $1 billion park to create in the first place, you might as well have created a $3 billion experience and gotten your money from day one. However, there was a problem that came along and that ultimately shut down this concept. While it was decided that they would build out the Disneyland Resort, it was going to be done at a lesser price. And why? Because Disneyland Paris opened and it bled money. Some say it bled as much as $1 million a day. And Disney had its hands tied, especially as Michael Eisner lost Frank Wells, who was the brilliant one when it came to figuring out financial strategies. Their hands were tied. And with that, the idea of saying we're going to spend $3 billion when we're paying this kind of money every year for Disneyland Paris to be in a loss, it just wasn't the time and place for doing that. So by now, anyone examining this could see that this was an amazing possibility for a park and entire resort. But unfortunately, it didn't happen. And before we get into more of that story, we first also have to consider that Disney wasn't proposing just one new park. It was proposing 2 parks, with the other to be potentially in Long Beach, in the space that Jack Rather owned, or once owned, that Disney bought. Port Disney was a second option being put on the table, with the hopes of getting Long Beach and Anaheim to somehow compete to put enough tax dollars on the table to make either project workable. We'll have a chance to talk about that on another future day, but know that that many of the ideas from Westcot ultimately would live out to become part of Tokyo Disney Sea. And even some of these concepts would live on to become part of Disney's California aesthetic as they created Disney California Adventure. All right. Well, you can see we have covered an amazing amount of details dealing with Westcot and the entire Disneyland Resort. If you like this kind of nerdy insight on all things Disney, then please check out my newest offering. For over a year, I've been capturing and sharing stories of Disneyland while creating a new online tool for you to explore them all in one place. It's called Disneyland Insights, inspiration, ideas, and magic for you and your organization. And it's an interactive multimedia experience designed for those who are seeking to find new ideas that will guide you to provide individual and organizational leadership excellence, create employee engagement and a team culture, and offer a superior customer experience. All the while looking at stories and examples and ideas that were part of Disney, many stories of which you haven't heard before. So check out Disneyland Insights, inspiration, ideas, and magic for you and your organization. You can also check out my books, Disney Insights 100, A Century of Powerful Insights, Wonderful World of Customer Service at Disney, where we dig deep on the customer experience at Disney like no other book does, and then Disney Leadership in You, which looks at how you can create a leadership philosophy similar to Disney. Check out those books. The links to that, as well as Disneyland Insights, is on our DisneyInsights.com page, as well as the show notes page for this podcast. Finally, thanks for joining us. As you know, in the title of my organization, Performance Journeys, it's as much about the journey as it is about performance. So find the second star to the right and keep going straight on till you reach it. Follow the compass of your heart and know that with a smile and a song, a little faith, effort, and pixie dust, your dreams can come true. After all, if we can dream it, we can do it. Until next time, bright suns. We'll see you real soon.